They called it a gala for hope. Inside the crystal ballroom of St. Jude's Hospital, 300 millionaires held their breath as Dr. Clayton Vance raised a glass. To them, he was a god in a tuxedo, about to perform a miracle surgery on his own paralyzed daughter. But they didn't see the trembling in the girl's hands. They didn't know that the cure Vance promised wasn't going to fix her legs, it was going to lobotomize her soul. He was going to cut out the part of her brain that remembered how to be afraid, just so she would finally be perfect. The room was suffocatingly silent, until the crash came. It didn't come from the stage. It exploded from the back doors. A boy, a dirty, sweat-stained janitor who had been fired 3 hours ago, standing on the plush carpet in muddy boots. Security moved to crush him instantly. They saw trash. They saw a threat. But the boy didn't scream, and he didn't run. He looked straight at the paralyzed girl on stage and slammed his foot into the marble floor with the force of a pile driver. Thud. It was an ugly sound, a violent, desperate vibration. Vance laughed, signaling the guards to drag the filth away. But then, the laughter died in his throat. Because on the stage, the girl who hadn't moved a muscle in 2 years didn't just sit there. Her finger lifted, and against the cold metal of her wheelchair, she tapped back. The air in the crystal ballroom smelled of money, a specific blend of expensive perfume, roast beef, and the metallic tang of chilled champagne. It was a suffocating scent, heavy enough to coat the throat. Dr. Clayton Vance stood at the podium, basking in it. The spotlight hit his silver hair just right, turning him into the very image of a modern savior. To the 300 donors sitting in the dark before him, he wasn't just a neurosurgeon, he was a god in a tuxedo. For 2 years, Vance said, his voice smooth as polished glass, we have looked at paralysis as a sentence. Tonight, I am telling you, it is merely a punctuation mark. He paused for effect. A ripple of polite applause moved through the room. Tomorrow morning, I will perform a procedure that will rewrite the textbooks. We are not just repairing nerve endings. We are restructuring hope. Vance turned his body slightly, gesturing to the shadow at the edge of the stage. And I am doing it for the toughest patient I have ever known. My daughter. The spotlight swung violently to the left, blinding the girl in the wheelchair. Maya Vance didn't blink. She was 15 years old, but in that chair, draped in a pale blue dress that looked too much like a hospital gown, she looked 10. Her hands were folded in her lap, dead weight. Her eyes were fixed on a point somewhere past the exit sign. She was the perfect prop. Tragic, beautiful, and silent. The donors cooed, poor thing, so brave. They didn't see the way Maya's knuckles were white, gripping her own thumb so hard the nail was digging into skin. They didn't know that inside her head, the silence wasn't peaceful. It was a screaming void. She wasn't just paralyzed from the waist down. She had locked herself in a room inside her mind 2 years ago, the day the car flipped, and she had thrown away the key. Vance walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. To the audience, it was a fatherly comfort. To Maya, it felt like a clamp. Tomorrow, Maya returns to us, Vance whispered into the microphone, his voice thick with rehearsed emotion. The double doors at the back of the ballroom didn't just open, they exploded inward. The sound was like a gunshot, shattering the polite murmur of the crowd. Heads snapped around. A waiter dropped a tray of crystal flutes, the shattering glass echoing the intrusion. Standing in the doorway, framed by the harsh fluorescent light of the hallway, was a boy. He was a stain on the pristine evening. Jax, 19 years old, wearing a gray janitor's jumpsuit that was stained dark with sweat and dirty mop water. His chest was heaving, his breath coming in ragged gasps that tore through the sudden silence of the room. He held a single, battered tap shoe in his hand like a weapon. "Don't do it!" Jax yelled. His voice cracked, raw and desperate. "You don't touch her, Vance." The silence in the room shifted from respectful to horrified. Security guards in the corners stiffened, hands moving to their earpieces. Dr. Vance didn't shout. He didn't panic. He simply adjusted his glasses, looking at the boy across the room the way he looked at a tumor on an MRI scan. Something invasive that needed to be excised. "Security," Vance said, his voice calm, amplified by the speakers. "Please remove the trash. I'm not trash." Jack stepped forward, his sneakers squeaking violently against the polished marble floor. He ignored the two large men in suits closing in on him. His eyes locked onto the girl on the stage. "Maya, look at me." Maya didn't move. She stared straight ahead, frozen. "She can't hear you, son," Vance said, a cruel smile touching the corners of his mouth. "She barely knows you exist. You clean her floor. That is all. I know her better than you do." Jack screamed. The guards grabbed him, one seizing his arm, the other grabbing the collar of his jumpsuit. They dragged him backward, his heels skidding on the floor. "You cut her open tomorrow, and you kill her. You're trying to fix a machine, but she's a dancer." "She was a dancer," Vance corrected coldly. "Now, she is my patient." Jax fought against the grip of the guards. He was lean, wiry strength built from years of street dancing and hauling heavy equipment. But he was outnumbered. They were hauling him toward the exit. He was losing. He was miles away from her. He couldn't reach her with words. He knew that. Words were useless in Maya's world. So, he stopped fighting. For a split second, Jax went limp, confusing the guards. As their grip loosened just an inch, he slammed his right foot down onto the marble floor. Thud. It wasn't just a step. It was a calculated impact, driving the heel of his sneaker into the ground with the force of a pile driver. The sound was dull, heavy, and resonant. It traveled through the floorboards, a vibration you could feel in your teeth. The guards hesitated. Thud, thud. Jack stomped again, a double beat, a heartbeat, a syncopated rhythm that cut through the classical music drifting from the speakers. It was aggressive. It was ugly. It was the sound of the Chicago underground, of desperation, of a heart beating against a rib cage. Vance laughed, a dry, dismissive sound. "Get him out of here. He's having a psychotic break." The guards tightened their grip, dragging Jax toward the doors. "Maya!" Jax roared, not looking at her face, but at the floor. "Feel it? Don't let them mute you." He managed one last, violent stomp before they shoved him through the doors. The vibration shuddered through the room, fading into the carpet, traveling up the wooden stage, vibrating through the rubber wheels of the wheelchair. Vance shook his head, smoothing his tuxedo jacket. "My apologies, everyone. The city's mental health crisis, unfortunately, reaches even here. Now, as I was saying..." He looked down at his daughter, expecting the usual blank stare. But Maya wasn't staring at the exit sign anymore. Her head was lowered, her hair covered her face, and there, resting on the armrest of the wheelchair, her right index finger moved. It wasn't a spasm, it wasn't a twitch. It struck the leather armrest once, then twice. Tap, tap. It was the exact answer to Jax's rhythm, a secret language spoken in a room full of strangers. Vance didn't see it. The audience didn't see it. But Maya raised her head, and for the first time in 2 years, Her eyes weren't empty. They were burning with a terrifying, silent rage. The intruder was gone, but the echo remained. 3 weeks earlier, the world was measured in billable hours and overdue notices. Jax pushed a yellow mop bucket down the sanitized hallway of the 4th floor, the wheels rattling with a cadence that annoyed the night nurses. It was 2 a.m. The hospital didn't sleep, but it held its breath. The air conditioners hummed a low, monotonous B-flat that burrowed into your skull if you listened too long. Jax tried not to listen. He tried to focus on the ache in his left knee, a sharp, biting reminder of the concrete landing that had ended his career before it really began. 2 years ago, he had been the kid everyone in Southside Chicago bet on. The boy who could turn a sidewalk into a drum kit with just a pair of scuffed sneakers. Now, at 19, he was a ghost in a gray jumpsuit, wiping up other people's spills while his foster brother, Leo, texted him panic attacks from their basement apartment. "They're coming for the interest tomorrow, Jax. I don't have it." Jax gripped the mop handle tighter. He didn't have it either. He parked the bucket outside room 402, the VIP suite. The nurses called it the vault. It was the only room on the floor with a private security detail during the day. But at night, it was just another closed door guarding a tragedy. Jax swiped his key card. The light turned green. He pushed inside, keeping his eyes on the floor tiles. Rule number 1 of the night shift: be invisible. The rich people dying in these beds didn't want to be reminded of the people cleaning up after them. But the girl in the bed wasn't sleeping. Maya Vance sat in her wheelchair by the window, her silhouette cut out against the glow of the Chicago skyline. She was wearing massive, noise-canceling headphones, the kind that cost more than Jax's rent. Her back was to him. She didn't turn when the door hissed shut. She didn't move when he squeezed the mop out, the mechanism clanking loudly in the silence. She was just static. Jax started in the corner near the bathroom. He worked methodically, swinging the mop in wide, rhythmic arcs. Left, right, step, drag. It was muscle memory. Even when he was cleaning, he couldn't stop counting beats. 1 and 2, 3 and 4. It was a sickness, this need to find a groove in the silence. He glanced at the girl again. Something was wrong. The headphones were over her ears, large and encompassing. But the cord dangled loose, swaying slightly with the draft from the vent. The jack wasn't plugged into a phone or a tablet. It was resting on the floor. She wasn't listening to music. She was wearing them to block out the world. She was wearing them so no one would talk to her. Jax paused. He looked at the girl, the daughter of the man who owned the building, and saw something familiar. He recognized that posture. He'd seen it in the mirror 1,000 times after the doctors told him his knee was shredded meat. It was the posture of someone who had decided that if they couldn't move, they wouldn't feel either. He looked down at his shoes. Cheap, rubber-soled work boots. Heavy. Without really thinking about it, maybe just to prove she wasn't a statue, Jax let his heel drop. It wasn't a tap. It was a mistake, a heavy shift of weight that sent a dull vibration through the linoleum floor. Maya's shoulder twitched. It was microscopic, but Jax saw it. She didn't hear the sound through the noise-canceling foam, but she felt the floor shake. Jax stood frozen. He looked at the loose cord on the floor, then at the girl's rigid back. She's not deaf, he thought. She's numb. He dragged the mop across the floor again, but this time he added a syncopated skip to his step. He slapped the wet strings of the mop down with a deliberate force. Slap, drag, step. The vibration traveled across the room. The physics of the hospital were simple. cheap construction disguised by expensive paint. The floor was a conductor. Maya's hand, resting on the metal armrest of her chair, tightened. She didn't turn around. She didn't want to acknowledge him. That would break the spell of isolation she had carefully built. But her body betrayed her. Her head tilted just a fraction of an inch, angling not toward him, but toward the ground, and she was listening with her skin. Jax felt a strange, dangerous spark in his chest. He forgot the cameras. He forgot Leo's debt. He forgot his bad knee. He lifted the heavy plastic bucket a few inches and set it down. Thump. He tapped his ring against the metal handle of the mop. Click, click. He slid his boot across a dry patch of tile. Screech, thump, click, click, screech. It was ugly. It was industrial. It was the sound of a janitor working. But to a musician, it was a measure of 4/4 time with a swung eighth note. Maya turned. It was a slow, reluctant movement. She swiveled the chair around, her face pale and devoid of expression, framed by the bulky headphones. Her eyes found him. They were dark, intelligent, and fiercely guarded. She looked at him like he was a specimen in a jar. Jax didn't look away. He didn't apologize. He didn't say, "Sorry, miss, just cleaning." He held her gaze, and with deliberate slowness, he lifted his foot and brought it down again. A soft, controlled stomp. The floor carried the message to her wheels. He saw the vibration travel up the frame of the chair. He saw her eyes widen, just a fraction. She knew he was doing it on purpose. For a long minute, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator in the corner. Jax waited. He was sweating, terrified that she would reach for the call button and summon the security guards to drag the weirdo janitor out. Instead, Maya moved her hand. She slid it off the armrest and let it hang down, her fingers brushing the cold tiles of the floor. She placed her palm flat against the linoleum. She was plugging herself in. She looked up at him, her expression challenging, almost daring him. "Do it again," her eyes said. "Prove it wasn't an accident." Jax grinned. It wasn't a nice customer service smile. It was the crooked, sharp grin of a street kid who just found an open window. He started to clean, but he cleaned like he was on stage at the Apollo. He spun the mop, creating a rhythmic swish. He kicked the bucket forward, catching it with his toe before it tipped, creating a rolling bass note. He hammered a rhythm with his heels, a complex, stuttering beat that filled the sterile room with the messy, chaotic noise of life. He wasn't fixing her. He wasn't telling her everything would be okay. He was just telling her, through the soles of his boots, that the ground was still solid, and she was still here. For the first time in 3 weeks, the night shift didn't feel silent. It felt like the beginning of a conversation. The conspiracy began on a Tuesday, and by Friday, it had become a ritual. The hospital at 3 a.m. was a kingdom of ghosts, but room 402 had become a sanctuary of secret noise. Jack stopped pretending to clean the moment the door hissed shut. He would drag the heavy leather armchair closer to the bed, not for himself, but to serve as a bridge. He brought a small, battered Bluetooth speaker from home, a cheap black brick held together by duct tape and hope. He didn't play music loud enough for the hallway to hear. He played it for the furniture. "You have to bypass your ears," Jax whispered, placing the speaker face down on the metal bedside table. "Your ears are lazy. They just hear noise. Your bones? They hear the truth." Maya watched him with the intensity of a starving animal. She reached out, her pale hand trembling slightly, and pressed her palm flat against the metal surface of the table. Jax hit play on his phone. It was a deep, bass-heavy track, lo-fi hip-hop with a kick drum that felt like a heartbeat underwater. The metal table vibrated. The sound waves traveled up through Maya's palm, bypassing the damaged circuits of her spine, and rattled the bones of her arm. Her eyes widened. She wasn't hearing the song, she was holding it. Jax watched the monitor above her bed. Her heart rate, usually a sluggish flat line of depression, spiked. 70, 80, 90. Feel that? Jax asked, keeping his voice low. That's the pocket. That's where the groove lives. Maya didn't speak. She still hadn't uttered a syllable in 2 years. But she did something more communicative. She closed her eyes and nodded, a microscopic movement of her chin, perfectly in time with the snare drum. For an hour, they existed in this bubble. Jax would tap out complex polyrhythms on the bed frame, on the floor, on the glass of the window, teaching her to distinguish between the sharp crack of a treble and the dull thud of a bass. He was teaching her a new language, one that didn't require vocal cords or working legs. But outside the bubble, the watchdogs were waking up. At the nurse's station down the hall, head nurse Grady stared at the telemetry monitors with the suspicion of a predator sensing a shift in the wind. She was a woman who believed in order, sterility, and the absolute authority of Dr. Vance. "Look at this," Grady muttered, pointing a manicured nail at screen 4. The young night nurse, sleepy-eyed and sipping coffee, squinted. "Patient 402? What about her?" "Her heart rate," Grady said, her voice tight. "It's fluctuating. Look at the pattern. It goes up for 3 minutes, then settles, then spikes again. It's rhythmic." "Maybe she's having a nightmare," the young nurse suggested. "Or maybe she's distressed," Grady corrected, her eyes narrowing. Dr. Vance was clear. Any agitation could compromise the neural pathways before the surgery. Stress releases cortisol. Cortisol is poison to recovery. She glanced at the duty roster. "Who is cleaning the VIP wing tonight?" "Jax," the nurse said. "The quiet kid." Grady didn't answer. She just watched the jagged green line of Maya's heart dancing on the screen, a chaotic scribble that looked suspiciously like joy, which Grady misinterpreted as panic. She reached for the phone. "Keep an eye on him. If that heart rate goes over 100, I want security in that room." Jax didn't know he was being watched. He had bigger problems waiting for him underground. When his shift ended at 6 a.m., the transition from the sterile, climate-controlled air of the hospital to the damp, molding reality of his basement apartment was like a physical blow. The apartment smelled of stale ramen noodles and fear. Leo was sitting on the lumpy mattress they shared, cradling his right arm. The cast was fresh, stark white against his bruised skin. He was 17, 2 years younger than Jax. But today he looked like an old man. "They came back," Leo whispered, not meeting Jax's eyes. Jax froze, his hand still on the doorknob. The exhaustion of the night shift evaporated, replaced by a cold spike of adrenaline. "Who?" "The collection guys. Frankie's crew." Leo winced as he shifted his weight. "They said the interest went up. 5,000, Jax. They want it by the end of the month." Jax dropped his backpack. "We don't have 5,000, Leo. We barely have 500. "I know." Leo's voice cracked. Tears leaked from his eyes, carving tracks through the grime on his face. They said next time it won't be my arm. They said they'll take your knees, Jax. They know you used to dance. They said they'll make sure you never walk without a cane again." Jax felt the blood drain from his face. His knees, his ruined, aching knees, were the only things he had left. But looking at his little brother, broken and terrified, Jax knew the equation had changed. He needed this job. He needed the overtime. He needed to be invisible, obedient, and perfect, so he could scrape together every cent. "Stay away from the girl," his brain screamed. "Do your job. Mop the floor. Go home. Don't play hero. But when he returned to the hospital the next night, the logic fell apart the moment he saw her. Maya was waiting. She wasn't wearing the headphones. She was sitting facing the door, her hands gripping the armrests of her wheelchair so hard her knuckles were translucent. When Jax entered, she didn't look at his mop bucket. She looked at his hands. She was starving for the noise. Jax stood there, the weight of Leo's debt crushing his chest. He should turn around. He should just clean the bathroom and leave. "I can't stay long tonight," Jax said, his voice rough. "They're watching me." Maya's face fell. It wasn't a tantrum. It was a devastation so quiet it was louder than a scream. She slumped back, the light dying in her eyes, retreating back into her fortress of silence. Jax cursed under his breath. He hated himself. He hated Vance. He hated the money he didn't have. He let go of the mop. It clattered to the floor. He walked over to the bed and sat on the edge, invading the sterile space. "Hey," he said gently. "Look at me." Maya looked up, wary. "We can't use the speaker tonight." "Too risky," Jax said. He tapped his temple with his index finger. "So we're going to do it in here." Maya frowned, confused. "Mental choreography," Jax explained. "My old teacher taught me this when I blew out my knee. When you can't move, you visualize. You imagine the movement so clearly that your muscles twitch, trying to keep up." He leaned in closer. "Close your eyes." Maya hesitated, then squeezed her eyes shut. "Imagine you're standing on a snare drum," Jax whispered, his voice becoming a rhythmic chant. "The skin of the drum is tight under your feet. You're wearing tap shoes with aluminum plates. You lift your right heel, you drop it. Crack, you shuffle your left foot. Swish, swish, you stomp. Boom." He described the dance, beat by beat, painting the sound in the air. He wasn't just describing steps. He was describing freedom. He talked about the heat of the stage lights, the smell of rosin dust, the way the vibration travels up the shin bone and settles in the teeth. As he spoke, he saw it. Maya's legs, hidden under the blue hospital blanket, didn't move. But her thigh muscles tensed, her breathing synced with his rhythm. She was dancing in the dark behind her eyelids. And then, it happened. The corner of her mouth twitched. It wasn't a polite smile. It was a crooked, rusty, painful thing. A muscle that hadn't been used in years, trying to remember its function. She opened her eyes. The smile stayed, just for a second, lopsided and beautiful. She reached out and grabbed Jax's hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. She pulled his hand to her lap and traced a single word onto his palm with her finger. M-O-R-E. Jax looked at the girl, then thought of Leo's broken arm and the debt hanging over his head. He knew he was walking on a razor's edge. He knew Nurse Grady was probably staring at a monitor somewhere, wondering why patient 402's heart was racing like a hummingbird. He squeezed her hand back. "Okay," Jax whispered, sealing his own fate. More. The shoes were wrapped in a plastic bodega bag, hidden at the bottom of the yellow mop bucket. They were Capezio K360s, black leather, scuffed gray at the toes and cracked at the heels. To anyone else, they were garbage. To Jax, they were the only things he owned that had a soul. He hadn't put them on in 2 years, not since the landing that shattered his knee. But tonight, the desperation in room 402 called for heavy artillery. It was 3:15 a.m. The hospital hummed with its mechanical slumber. Jax locked the door. He knew it was a violation of protocol. He knew Nurse Grady was watching the monitors like a hawk. But he also knew that Maya was fading. Last night, her hand had trembled when he left. a silent plea that terrified him more than any debt collector. "I brought something," Jax whispered. He pulled the shoes from the bag. The smell of old leather and dried sweat filled the antiseptic air between them. Maya stared at the shoes. She reached out and ran a finger over the aluminum tone plate screwed to the bottom of the heel. It was cold and scratched, a piece of metal that had seen 1,000 sidewalks. "The table isn't enough anymore," Jack said. He looked at the floor, then at her. "The vibration dies before it gets to your spine. If you really want to feel this, you have to get down." It was a dangerous request. Maya looked at the expanse of linoleum tile. It was hard, cold, and miles away from the safety of her chair. But she didn't hesitate. She unlocked her brakes. Jax moved quickly. He didn't lift her like a nurse, efficient and detached. He lifted her like a brother, clumsy but careful, taking her weight, which was nothing, she was bird-bone light, and lowering her toward the ground. He settled her on the floor, placing a folded blanket under her chest. Maya lay flat on her stomach, her cheek pressed against the cold tiles, her arms spread wide like she was trying to hug the earth. She looked vulnerable, broken, but her eyes were wide open, staring at his feet. Jack sat on the edge of the bed and laced up the shoes. His hands shook. His knee gave a warning throb, a sharp needle of pain that he swallowed down. "This is the rhythm of a train leaving Union Station," Jax murmured. He stood up. The shoes felt heavy, grounding him. He didn't start with a stomp. He started with a brush, a soft, sweeping sound of metal grazing tile. It sounded like a broom sweeping glass. Maya's eyes fluttered. Then he dropped the heel. The impact sent a shockwave through the floor. Because Maya was pressed against the tiles, she didn't just feel it. She became the instrument. Her ribcage acted as a resonator. The vibration traveled through her sternum, rattled her teeth, and settled deep in the marrow of her frozen legs. Jax closed his eyes and let go. He forgot the debt. He forgot the mop. He danced the way he used to dance before the world broke him, angry, fast, and desperate. He hammered out triplets that sounded like machine gun fire. He slid across the tiles, creating a long, screeching wail of metal on stone. He jumped, landing flat-footed, a boom that shook the water pitcher on the bedside table. Below him, Maya was weeping. Not the silent, leaking tears of the last 2 years. Her mouth was open in a silent gasp, her body shaking with the force of the vibrations Jax was feeding her. She was feeling the music inside her own body. For a few minutes, the paralysis didn't matter because her blood was dancing. Jax spun, building to a crescendo, his feet moving in a blur of motion. The door didn't open. It flew open. The light from the hallway poured in, blinding and harsh, slicing through the intimacy of the moment. Jax froze mid-step, his shoe hovering an inch off the floor. Dr. Clayton Vance stood in the doorway. He was wearing a tailored wool coat over his suit, having just arrived for an emergency consult. Behind him stood Nurse Grady, her face a mask of horrified vindication. The scene they saw was damning. A dirty janitor in work clothes looming over a teenage girl who was lying prostrate on the dirty floor. A bucket in the corner, an unauthorized pair of shoes. Vance didn't yell. He didn't move. He stared at his daughter, his fragile, broken project, lying on the ground where people walked with muddy boots. He saw the tears on her face and assumed the worst. "Get away from her," Vance said. His voice was terrifyingly quiet. It was the voice of a man who held scalpels for a living. Jack stepped back, hands raised. "Sir, I was just helping her "Don't speak," Vance cut him off, stepping into the room. He walked past Jax as if he were an infectious disease and knelt beside his daughter. Maya? Maya, did he hurt you? Maya shook her head frantically. She reached out toward Jax, her fingers scrabbling against the tiles. She tried to make a sound, a croak, anything to explain that this was the first time she had felt alive in years. But Vance couldn't see it. He saw contamination. He saw chaos invading his sterile laboratory. "Grady, get security," Vance ordered, not looking up. He tried to lift Maya, but she resisted, her body going rigid, her hands reaching for the tap shoes Jax was wearing. "Sir, she likes the vibration," Jax pleaded, desperation making him reckless. "She feels the rhythm. It wakes up her nerves. You have to let her." Vance stood up and turned to Jax. The look in the doctor's eyes was profound, cold hatred. "You think this is a game?" Vance hissed, advancing on him. "You think because you tap your feet, you understand neurology? My daughter is a complex medical case, not a street corner attraction." Vance looked down at Jax's feet, at the scuffed, cheap tap shoes on his polished hospital floor. "You are dragging dirt into a sterile environment," Vance said, his voice trembling with disgust. "You are bacteria, son. You are an infection, and I am cutting you out." Two security guards appeared in the doorway, breathless and large. "Remove him," Vance said, turning his back on Jax. "And burn those shoes." As the guards grabbed Jax's arms, hauling him backward, Maya finally made a sound. It was a high, thin, keening noise, like a wire being pulled until it snapped. She thrashed in her father's arms as he tried to lift her back into the bed. She kicked out, her legs flailing uselessly, her eyes locked on Jax. "Maya!" Jax shouted as he was dragged into the hallway. "Keep the rhythm. Don't lose it." The door slammed shut. Inside room 402, the silence returned, heavier and colder than before. Vance stood over his daughter, who was now curled in a fetal ball, shaking violently. Her heart rate monitor was screaming a high-pitched alarm. Vance watched the numbers climb, 140, 150, 160. He saw panic. He saw instability. He saw a girl who was broken beyond repair. He picked up the phone on the wall. "Prepare the OR," Vance said, staring at his trembling daughter. "We're not waiting for next week. We operate tomorrow morning, immediately after the gala." He hung up. He thought he was saving her. He didn't realize he had just declared war on her soul. Chicago rain didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. Jax hit the pavement outside the emergency room exit, his body skidding on the wet asphalt. His bag, tossed after him by a security guard who wouldn't even look him in the eye, landed in a puddle of oil and rainwater. The heavy steel doors slammed shut with a finality that echoed in his chest. Click, buzz, locked. He sat there for a long moment, the water soaking through his thin gray jumpsuit, chilling him to the bone. His knee was throbbing, a deep, grinding ache that usually signaled a storm coming, or maybe the storm was already here. He checked the bag. The shoes were there, wet, smelling of gutter water, but there. He clutched them to his chest, not because they were valuable, but because they were the only proof that the last hour hadn't been a hallucination. He had felt it. He had felt the floorboards sing under Maya's chest. He had seen the life spark in eyes that had been dead for 2 years. And for that crime, he had been discarded like medical waste. Jax limped to the bus stop. The ride back to the south side was a blur of neon lights smearing against the window and the hollow metallic taste of failure in his mouth. When he got to the basement apartment, the door was unlocked. It wasn't just unlocked. The jamb was splintered. "Leo?" Jax called out, pushing the door open. The air inside didn't smell like ramen anymore. It smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap cologne, the scent of Frankie's collection crew. The apartment had been tossed. The mattress was overturned. The few drawers they owned were pulled out, their contents scattered across the concrete floor. Leo was gone. Jack stood in the center of the wreckage, his hands shaking. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It wasn't a call. It was a video message from an unknown number. He opened it. The video was dark, shaky. It showed Leo sitting in the back of a moving car, looking terrified, his casted arm cradled against his chest. "Tell your brother the interest just doubled," a voice behind the camera laughed. "We're taking a little ride. If the money isn't at the drop by tomorrow night, we start breaking the legs that still work." The screen went black. Jax dropped the phone on the mattress. He sank to his knees, burying his face in his hands. $10,000. He couldn't raise $10,000 if he sold every organ in his body. He had failed Leo. He had failed Maya. He was 19 years old, and he had absolutely nothing left to lose, because everything had already been taken. He sat there in the dark for an hour, listening to the drip of a leaking pipe, letting the silence swallow him whole. Then, the phone buzzed again. Jack stared at it. If it was Frankie again, he didn't want to know. But the screen lit up with a blocked caller ID. He swiped answer, his voice dead. "I don't have the money." "Jax?" It wasn't Frankie. It was a woman's voice, hushed and urgent. It took Jax a second to recognize it, the young nurse from the night shift, the one who sometimes gave him an extra coffee. "Sarah, Jax, listen to me," she whispered. The background noise was the rhythmic beeping of hospital monitors. She was hiding somewhere. "I don't have much time. Grady is on a warpath. I'm fired, Sarah." "I know," Jax said, reaching to hang up. "No, it's not about the job. It's about Maya." Jax froze. "Is she okay?" "They moved the surgery up," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "Vance scheduled it for 8 a.m. tomorrow. But Jax, I saw the pre-op charts. I saw what he's actually planning to do." Jax gripped the phone tight. He's fixing her nerves. He said he's restructuring hope. "That's the PR speech," Sarah hissed. "The procedure is a modified anterior cingulotomy. It's psychosurgery, Jax. He's convinced her panic attacks and her resistance are preventing physical recovery. He's going to sever the pathways in the brain that process intense emotion." The room seemed to tilt. Jax felt sick. What does that mean? "It means she won't feel panic anymore," Sarah said, crying now. "But she won't feel joy either. She won't feel the rhythm, Jax. He's going to turn her into a quiet, obedient doll that can walk. He's cutting out the part of her that dances." Jax couldn't breathe. He thought of Maya lying on the cold tiles, her body shaking with the music, her eyes wide with the sudden, terrifying realization that she was alive. Vance wanted to kill that. He wanted to trade her soul for a pair of working legs. "Why are you telling me this?" Jax whispered. "Because I saw her face when you were drumming on the floor," Sarah replied. "It was the only time she looked like a human being. Someone has to stop him. The board won't listen. The ethics committee is in Vance's pocket. The gala is tonight. All the donors are there. It's the only time he's vulnerable." The line went dead. Jax sat in the silence of his destroyed apartment. He looked at the empty space where Leo should be. He had to find $10,000 by tomorrow night, or his brother would be crippled. Logic dictated he should be out on the street, begging, stealing, finding a hustle. But then he looked at the wet tap shoes lying on the floor. One was lying on its side, the other was upright. They looked like wreckage. He thought about Leo. Leo, who had told him yesterday, "Don't let that girl die like you did, Jax." If Jax went to the gala, he wouldn't get the money. He would probably get arrested. He wouldn't save Leo. But Leo was tough. Leo was a survivor. Maya had hours left before she was erased. Jax stood up. The pain in his knee was a roaring fire now, but he welcomed it. It was real. It was a reminder that he was still broken, and therefore still dangerous. He walked over to the closet and pulled out his only other set of clothes, a black shirt and his old performance pants, tight enough to show the line of the leg, loose enough to move. He grabbed the shoes. He took a roll of silver duct tape from the kitchen drawer. He sat down and began to tape his knee, wrapping it tight, layer after layer, binding the damaged joint into a solid block of support. He wrapped it until the circulation cut off, then loosened it just enough to flex. He wasn't going to the hospital to clean floors. He wasn't going to beg for his job back. He picked up the single tap shoe, the right one, the one with the looser screw on the heel plate that rattled just the way he liked it. He left the left one. He didn't need a pair. He wasn't going there to dance a routine. He was going there to start a war. He walked out of the basement, leaving the door broken open, and stepped back into the rain. He didn't head toward the Lone Shark's drop point. He headed north, toward the lights of the city, toward the place where the rich people were drinking champagne and celebrating a murder. The silence was over. The echo of Jax's stomp didn't just fade, it hung in the air like smoke after a demolition. For 3 seconds, the crystal ballroom was suspended in a vacuum of shock. The security guards holding Jax were frozen, their grip slackening just enough for him to breathe. Dr. Vance stood on the stage, his hand halfway extended toward his daughter, his face a mask of crumbling composure. But the real movement was happening in the wheelchair. The vibration traveled up the rubber tires, through the aluminum frame, and into Maya's spine. It wasn't a gentle nudge. It was a collision. It was the same shockwave she had felt lying on the cold tiles of room 402, the same frequency that had told her, "You are not dead yet." Maya's head snapped up. Her hair fell back from her face, revealing eyes that were wide, wet, and terrified. But the terror wasn't paralyzed anymore. It was active. It was the terror of someone waking up in a burning house and realizing they have to run. "She's seizing," Nurse Grady hissed from the wings of the stage, rushing forward with a small medical kit. "Her heart rate is spiking." "Doctor, she's unstable." Vance's instincts took over. The father vanished. The surgeon appeared. He reached into his pocket, and not for a handkerchief, but for the sedative pen he kept for emergencies. "Restrain him," Vance ordered the guards, pointing at Jax. Then he turned to his daughter, his voice dropping to a soothing, dangerous purr. "It's okay, sweetheart. Just a little panic. We'll make it go away. Just like always." He uncapped the needle. He reached for Maya's arm. That was the mistake. Vance thought he was reaching for a patient. He didn't realize he was reaching for a drummer who had just found the downbeat. Maya didn't pull away. She lunged. With a speed that drew a collective gasp from the audience, she snatched the wireless microphone from its stand. She didn't bring it to her mouth. She didn't try to speak. Her vocal cords were still rusted shut by trauma. Instead, she swung the heavy, metal mesh head of the microphone down onto the steel rim of her wheel. Crack! The sound exploded through the massive PA system. It was sharp, biting, and incredibly loud. It sounded like a gunshot in a canyon. Vance flinched back, dropping the sedative. Maya hit the wheel again. Crack! Then she hit the padded armrest. Thud! Crack! Thud! Crack! It wasn't random noise. It was a measure. It was the specific, syncopated intro to the routine Jax had tapped on her palm 3 nights ago. She looked past the lights, past her father, locking eyes with the boy in the gray jumpsuit at the back of the room. "Answer me," the rhythm screamed. Jax felt the sound hit him in the chest. He saw the guards tightening their grip, preparing to drag him out into the alley and beat him until he couldn't walk. He felt the fire in his taped-up knee. He thought of Leo, waiting to be broken. But the girl on stage was fighting. She was fighting a lobotomy with a microphone. Jax twisted his body. He didn't try to break free. He used the guards as leverage. He dropped his weight, spinning out of the hold of the man on his left, and landed hard on his right foot. The shoe, the one with the loose screw, struck the marble floor. Rat-a-tat-tat. He didn't need a stage. The aisle between the tables was his stage. Jax launched himself into movement. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't the polished tap dancing of Broadway. It was street style. Low to the ground, aggressive, heavy on the heel. He stomped a triplet rhythm that answered Maya's beat. Boom, bada boom. Maya hit the wheel back. Crack, crack. The room erupted into chaos. Donors were standing up, knocking over wine glasses. Security was shouting. But the sound, this violent, industrial conversation between the boy on the floor and the girl on the stage, drowned everything else out. Jax moved closer to the stage. He ignored the pain tearing through his bad knee. Every impact felt like a hammer to the bone, but he turned the pain into force. He slammed his feet down, punishing the floor, punishing Vance, punishing the world that tried to crush them. Vance recovered. His face turned crimson. He realized this wasn't just a disruption, it was an insurrection. "Cut the sound!" Vance roared at the sound booth. "Cut the mic!" But the sound guy was too stunned to move. Vance lunged for the microphone in Maya's hand. "Give me that." Maya yanked it back. She swung it again, harder this time, hitting the rim so forcefully that feedback squealed through the speakers, a high-pitched wail that made people cover their ears. Jax reached the base of the stage. He was sweating, his chest heaving, his eyes wild. He couldn't go up there. His legs wouldn't lift him that high. So he stayed in the pit, looking up at her. He didn't stop dancing. He hammered out a rapid-fire roll, a machine gun rhythm that demanded a climax. He was pushing her. "Come on, break it. Break the silence." Vance grabbed Maya's wrist. His grip was bruising. "Enough!" he shouted, his voice cracking. "You are sick. You are embarrassing yourself." He tried to pry her fingers off the microphone. He was overpowering her. The rhythm faltered. The crack became a weak thud. Maya looked at Jax. She saw him down there, fighting through the pain, stomping for her life. She saw the desperation in his face. She looked at her father. She saw the man who loved a perfect image of her more than the broken reality. She saw the man who wanted to cut out the part of her brain that felt fear and joy and rage. Something inside her chest, the dam that had held back the ocean for 2 years, finally cracked. Maya stopped hitting the wheel. She took a breath. It was a ragged, deep breath that expanded her crushed ribs. She brought the microphone to her lips. Vance froze, seeing the intent in her eyes. "Maya, don't." She didn't speak. She didn't whisper. She opened her mouth and let the monster out. "No." The word ripped through the ballroom. It wasn't the voice of a little girl. It was a guttural, raw, tearing sound. It was the sound of a vocal cord tearing itself free from scar tissue. "No!" She screamed again, louder this time, shaking with the force of it. "Stop!" The silence that followed was absolute. Vance released her wrist as if he had been burned. He stumbled back, staring at his mute daughter who had just shattered the air with her voice. Jax stopped dancing. He stood panting in the aisle, sweat dripping from his nose, his hand clutching his knee. Maya lowered the microphone. She was trembling violently, tears streaming down her face, ruining the makeup the nurses had applied. But her chin was up. She looked at her father, breathing hard into the amplified silence. "Don't," she rasped, her voice sounding like gravel and glass. "Don't cut me." Then she looked down at her legs, her useless, frozen legs wrapped in the blue silk dress. She gripped the armrests of her wheelchair. Her knuckles turned white. She didn't look at Jax for help. She looked at him for rhythm. She nodded once. One more beat. Jax understood. He lifted his foot and brought it down. A slow, steady heartbeat thud. Thump. Maya pushed. Every muscle in her upper body strained. Her triceps bulged. Her neck corded with effort. She wasn't just trying to shift her weight. She was trying to rewrite her own biology through sheer force of will. The chair creaked. And then, impossibly, her hips lifted 2 inches off the seat. Gravity is a jealous law. It does not like to be disobeyed. As Maya pushed herself up, her arms shaking violently, gravity fought back. It pulled at her heavy, dormant legs. It dragged at her hips. The physics of the moment were impossible. Her triceps were screaming, burning with the effort of lifting her entire body weight, but her lower half remained dead weight, an anchor chained to the bottom of the ocean. She hovered there for a second, 2 inches of air between her and the seat. A statue suspended by sheer, desperate will. Then her arms gave out. She didn't fall gracefully. She collapsed forward, tumbling out of the wheelchair. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the room. Dr. Vance lunged forward, his hands reaching out to catch the broken doll before she shattered on the stage floor. But someone else was faster. Jax didn't use the stairs. He vaulted onto the stage, ignoring the fire in his taped knee, and slid across the polished wood. He didn't catch her. He slid underneath her. He became the floor she needed. Maya landed hard against his chest. They ended up in a tangled heap of limbs and gray fabric and blue silk. It was messy. It was undignified. It was exactly the kind of chaotic humanity Vance had spent a lifetime trying to sanitize. Vance stood over them, his hands hovering uselessly in the air. "Get away from her," he whispered. But the command had no teeth. He looked at his daughter, sprawled on the floor in the arms of a janitor, and he didn't see a victim. He saw her face. Maya was gasping for air, clutching Jax's shirt with both hands. She wasn't crying anymore. She was laughing. It was a wet, jagged, hysterical sound, bubbling up from a chest that had been compressed for too long. She looked up at her father. The microphone lay on the floor between them, feeding back a low, electric hum. "I fell," Maya rasped, her voice raw and scraping against the silence. Vance blinked, tears spilling over his cheeks. "Maya, you're hurt. Let me help you up. Let me fix—" "No fixing," she croaked. She grabbed Jax's shoulder, using him as a brace. "I fell, Daddy." And I felt it. She hit her own leg with a fist. It was a dull thud. I felt the floor hit my knees. I felt the bruise forming. It hurt. She looked at him with eyes that were terrifyingly clear. It hurt, and it was mine. Vance fell to his knees. It wasn't a choice. His legs simply stopped working. The great neurosurgeon, the architect of hope, crumbled until he was eye level with his daughter. "I was trying to save you." Vance wept, his voice small. "I just wanted to take the pain away." "You took everything away," Maya whispered. "You wanted a daughter who walks. I just wanted a father who listens." She turned to Jax. She didn't have to speak. The rhythm was already there, pulsing between them. "Up," she whispered. Jax nodded. He shifted his stance. He didn't pick her up like a baby. He stood up first, planting his feet wide, locking his bad knee into a pillar of support. Then he reached down and offered his hands. Maya took them. This wasn't a medical miracle. This was engineering. Maya locked her elbows. She engaged her core. She used Jax's body as a scaffolding. She dragged herself up, inch by agonizing inch, her dead legs trailing behind her until her feet found purchase on the wood. She couldn't stand on her own. If Jax let go, she would crumble. But he didn't let go. He pulled her close, wrapping one arm around her waist, clamping her body to his. He took her weight completely. To the audience, it looked like a dance. A strange, frozen tango where one partner held the other upright against the pull of the earth. Maya stood. Her head rested on Jax's shoulder. She looked out at the sea of blurred faces, at the chandeliers, at her father kneeling in the wreckage of his ego. "See me?" She breathed into the microphone on the floor. She wasn't walking. She was leaning, but she was vertical. And for the first time in 2 years, she was looking the world in the eye. 6 weeks later. The basement of the St. Jude Community Center didn't smell like expensive perfume. It smelled of floor wax, old wood, and sweat. It was raining again in Chicago, a gray drizzle that streaked the high, narrow windows. Inside, the rhythm was warm. Jax sat on a wooden stool in the center of the room. He wasn't wearing a jumpsuit. He was wearing a polo shirt with a small ID badge clipped to the collar. Jackson Rivers, Arts Therapy Coordinator. His knee was braced, but he tapped his foot against the floor. A gentle, steady metronome beat. Across from him, in a circle, were 5 wheelchairs. 5 kids with various injuries, various silences, watching him with hungry eyes. And in the center of them sat Maya. She wasn't cured. The miracle of that night hadn't rewired her spine overnight. She still used the chair, but the headphones were gone. Her hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, and she was wearing sneakers, not dress shoes. "Okay," Jax said, his voice echoing in the small room. "Forget your ears. Listen with your wheels. Listen with your teeth." He hit a complex triplet on the wood block in his hand. Click, tock, click. The kids mimicked it. Some tapped their armrests. One boy hit his chest. Maya didn't use her hands. She sat perfectly still, her eyes closed, concentrating on the signals her brain was sending to the dark void of her lower body. The door to the studio opened quietly. Dr. Clayton Vance stood in the frame. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo or a lab coat. He wore a raincoat that looked a little too big for him now, as if he had shrunk in the wash. He held a wet umbrella. He didn't come in. He didn't try to take over. He didn't offer a suggestion on posture or neurological engagement. He just watched. Jax saw him. He didn't stop the class. He just nodded, a small, respectful acknowledgement of a truce. Vance nodded back, his eyes shifting to his daughter. "Focus on the big toe," Jax instructed softly. "Send the mail down the chute. Even if it doesn't get there, send the letter." Maya bit her lip. She furrowed her brow, straining against the static in her own nervous system. She channeled every ounce of her frustration, her joy, and her newfound voice into her right foot. Vance leaned forward in the doorway, holding his breath. There, inside the red sneaker, the fabric moved. It was tiny, a twitch, a centimeter of motion, a ghost in the machine. But Maya's eyes snapped open, and she smiled. It wasn't the polite smile of a debutante. It was the fierce, sweaty, triumphant grin of a fighter who had just landed a punch. She looked at the door. She saw her father. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice clear and strong. Vance smiled back, tears welling in his eyes. "I heard it loud and clear, Maya." "It was a C-sharp," Jax corrected, grinning. "It was a start," Maya said. Jax hit the woodblock again. The class followed, the room filled with a messy, beautiful, chaotic noise of broken things learning to make music together. And in the corner, the neurosurgeon closed his umbrella, sat down on a folding chair, and for the first time in his life, simply listened to the rhythm. You know, folks, Dr. Vance spent a fortune trying to fix a spine, but it took a kid with a $10 pair of shoes to fix a heart. It really makes you wonder. How many miracles do we miss every day, just because we're looking down on the people offering them? I want to hear from you down in the comments. Be honest with me. Do you think Dr. Vance deserves to be forgiven after what he almost did? Or is some damage too deep to heal? It's a tough question, but I want to know what you think. If this story touched something in you today, go ahead and click that subscribe button. We've got a lot more lives to untangle on this channel, and trust me, you won't want to miss the next one. Until then, keep listening for the rhythm.